Hi, and welcome back to the Quilter's Candy Shop, where you will find sweet treats for the discerning quilter. Hi, I'm Carrie, and I'm so excited you're here with us today because today we are going on to week number 5 of our Old Garden Baskets Quilt Sew-Along. Now, it's not too late to join our sew-along. There's no fee to follow us on YouTube, but you do need to purchase the pattern Basket Full of Blessings by Wendy Shepherd. In here you will find the fabric requirements and the cutting instructions for your initial pieces. After that, we're going to go step by step through the pattern and get you to the end where you will have a beautiful finished project. Now, you can find the pattern and a variety of kits all set up for you on our website at www.thequilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE shop.com. The quilt behind me is done with our white chocolate colorway. And through this video, I am using our Lakeside Julep colorway, which has a nice variety of lemon, lime, mint, and blues, and it is looking really fresh and wonderful. Now, let's get started. Last week, we finished our Ohio Star units, and they are looking so cute. Today, we are going to be putting these Ohio Stars right into our baskets right here, and we'll get the whole basket assembly done. Let's go to the sewing room and get started sewing something sweet. Okay, so you can see I have taken all my remaining pieces from my baskets and all my remaining background pieces that go in the basket. The borders and sashing are still left aside. A really fast and easy way to put this basket together is to actually create all of your rows and then put your rows together. And you're going to have your basket done in a flash. I am actually going to keep these stacked all in the same order as my Ohio Stars, and I'm just going to move this whole thing out of the way so that I have a staging area for sewing. Okay, so I've moved the first section over here, so it's efficient for me to go right into sewing, and I'm going to chain piece all of my handles. Just flip the handle over onto your background and then sew this seam scant 1/4 inch. The needle is in the down position. Lift your foot, slide it in. You can watch the mark on your foot. If you have a 1/4 inch foot, you don't want that sticking out past. If you've got a regular foot with a 1/4 inch mark, you're going to keep it on the inside of that mark, and we have our trusty diagonal seam tape right here that we can keep on the inside of that line, and then we know we've got a scant 1/4 inch. Sew this through, and then just pick up the next handle with the next background. Get it lined up and sew through. Nice and straight, nice and scant, and just continue on with all the rest of your handles, this piece onto this piece, and I'll meet you right back here. Trim it off, and now look how great it's going to be to have this bee saver, because this is going to be a lot faster right here. Just finger press that open, take another piece of your background, put it on here, and now we're going to sew this seam. Finger press, add the piece, and sew a nice scant 1/4 inch. Don't press it in between because we're going to press them all at once to save time. Okay, here's my stack that I've got all put together, and we are going to iron the pairs, so 2 at a time for good efficient pressing. So we just want to do a quick press to get our seam allowances towards the inside. And then these get set aside and on to the next 2. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and finish pressing up all my handles, and then we will set these aside and go on to the next step. Okay, one thing to remind you is when you're laying these pairs out, when you get to your directional, there's a good chance they're going to be upside down. So turn those right side up, because when you go to put them in your stack, you will want them right side up. Okay, our handle section is done. The next section is the top print with the little stripe. So I'm going to set these back with everything else. And this goes on top of your print like this. And you're going to sew your nice scant 1/4 inch down along this edge. Now keep in mind, these will have to be, you will have to be careful. So for example, here's my mushroom print, and I want those mushrooms standing up, and I need the stripe to be on the bottom of the mushrooms. So you will have to watch on these to make sure that you are getting everything put together properly. So same as before, take one, the other, line up the edges, scant 1/4 inch, same as before. I love having this diagonal seam tape. Everything lines up here, and watch that go through right along this line, giving me a perfect scant 1/4 inch all the way. And of course you have 2 baskets. So you'll have 2 for each print to do. All right, once you have these all put together, we'll take them to the ironing board and press the whole group at one time. Okay, once you have all your strips together, we are going to press all of them, but we're just going to do them one at a time. So the first thing is set the seam, and then open this up, and we're going to open up the seam. You can press this seam either way. You can press it all towards the dark, or you can open it like this. I recommend opening it just because when you press it open, you will get less rainbowing than if you press it all to one side. Set the seam, open it, just start at the end here, get your little fingers in there to open that up, and you can feel that you've got it flat. Just like you can feel it nest, you can feel that you've got it flat. That's all you have to get flat. Then the iron nose will do the rest. You can run your finger in front of it, but there you go. That's all you have to do. And see, you're going straight down the piece, and everything's flat, and you don't get quite the rainbow effect. So I'm just going to leave these here like this and just keep stacking them up. Okay, here are all my strips pressed, and set these aside, and we're going to go on to the next section, which is our Ohio star and the 2 sides of the basket. Check to make sure if you have a directional fabric that it's up and down, and make sure all these pieces are up and down, and all these pieces are up and down. So this stack goes like this. And now my mushrooms are right side up. And you take the Ohio star and flip it over. That puts your seam allowance to the top and this nice flat piece on the bottom. I would recommend 2 pins. If you're very experienced, you may not need these. But if you are a beginner, find that seam allowance that comes up here, just like we did when we were creating the Ohio Star. This one that comes across, there's my point. So I'm going to come just above it and over and pin, and the same right here. Find this seam allowance, this stitch line, there's my point, up and over, and pin it. I'm going to sew a nice scant line across here. Let's get this one sewn. Same thing, we're going to use scant 1/4 inch, and I'm aiming for that pin, and I'm going to take this pin out before I cross over. Continue sewing. I get to this pin, and then get the next one. Now these that are not directional, it doesn't really matter which way you have these, but if you have them all set so that the seam allowance, it goes the same way. So see how this one, the seam allowance goes out. So if I turn this one, and then this one, the seam allowance goes out on the sides, I'll have a consistency between all of my Ohio Stars. It's not super important. It's just a little detail. Sometimes it's these little details that really make the finished look of a quilt. For example, if you were going to enter something like this in a fair or for judging, you would want those seam allowances to all be the same. Okay, so I'm going to pin this one. All right, and run it through. All right, I'm going to do my whole stack onto here. Then I'm going to add this, and then we'll press it. Okay, here I have my stack of my finished Ohio Star attached to my larger piece of the basket. Our next step is to just open this up. We're not going to press it right yet. We're going to open this up, and we're going to put the other side on the Ohio Star. When you go to pick this up, be careful not to pick it up and flip it over to put it on this side, because you will have just put this on upside down. When you pick it up, flip it over this way, and then when you go to sew it, you can flip the whole thing over like this. When you have your seam allowances at the top, you'll be able to maintain them better, and you'll be able to make sure that these don't flip up here while you're sewing along. Also, you'll be able to see your points so you can hit them precisely, and you'll have a nice smooth backside so you can get a really good scant 1/4 inch. If you're a beginner, go ahead and use pins if you like. If you don't want to use pins, that's fine. Okay, I'm going to finish sewing all these up, and I will see you at the ironing board. All right, and here I have my stack of my sewn together Ohio Star with the left side and the right side. And this is really a fast press, because all you have to do is press these away from the stars. Still have a little bit of work to do on this section, but we're going to set it aside for now, and I'm going to show it to you when we go to put these sections together. So just get these pressed, and then we will start sewing the next section. All right, so here we have the main body of the baskets. Doesn't that look so cute? So we're just going to set this whole unit aside and work on the last lateral section of the basket. And this is the bottom of the basket, and it gets a little rounding half square triangle on each end. If you are using diagonal seam tape, you can just take these right to the sewing machine and sew them on. But if you are not using diagonal seam tape, you will need to take each one of these 40 squares, and you will need to draw a diagonal stitch and flip line from corner to corner, so that when you put the diagonal onto and stitch right on that line, so we make the bottom corner of the basket like that. Okay, let's quick talk about directional fabric. If you have a directional fabric, we'll go right down to those lovely little mushrooms again. You want your bottom of your basket, you want those mushrooms standing up straight. So just keep in mind the basket angles go like this. All right, this on this side and like this on this side. So you see how they're pointing in and down. You do have to make sure you get two opposite sides and they go from the top to the center, and you should just be consistent and do that with all of your strips. Okay, you've done 100 of these already, so I'm going to let you get started. I'm going to get started. When you get done, we'll go press these at the ironing board. All right, here I have all my bottom sections all sewn and my scant diagonal seam to make a half square triangle and the bottom shape of the basket. So these are really simple to press, and actually, like everything else, we're going to do 2 at a time for fast and efficient sewing. Okay, so first set those seams, and if you had to use a fiction marker, that's also going to take away those marking lines, and then you're just going to carefully pull back your half square triangle, match it up on the edges, and give that a press. Put that there, and the same thing here. I'm going to pull this back, match it up, and then give it a press. All right, so when that's done, we'll just set them aside and do the next ones. And the last step before I go on is, if you are happy with how your half square triangles are coming out on the corner, then you also need to cut the excess away. So you're going to leave a good 1/4 inch like that and cut that off. Both of these, trim back the excess like that. All right, and there's the bottom of your basket. I'm going to get the rest of mine done, and I'll meet you back at the sewing machine. And look at this, our basket is really starting to come together. So now all we have to do is put these 2 sections together. You just flip this over and sew, and these 2 sections together. Just flip this over and sew. All right, here we have our handle stack and our top edge of the basket stack. And this piece is just going to flip over onto the handle piece, and you're going to sew a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance down this long side. But I want you to turn this over this way and sew your scant 1/4 inch seam allowance this way, because this side is one solid piece and this side has seam allowances. This way you can manage your seam allowances and you can make sure everything is going to fit. When you take it to the machine, you'll do just as we've always been doing with our scant 1/4 inch, like this, and then match up these 2 ends down here. You should match up precisely. If you've got a problem in your seam allowance in here, this is where you're going to find out, but they really should line up. So we can just run this all the way through. Now you can manage that seam allowance, and this is matched up here at the bottom, and that way you're going to ease in any trouble. So, like that. And when you're done, you will have this piece attached like this. You will probably have to re-press your open seam allowance here, but you are going to press this seam allowance that you just sewed towards the top and away from the handle, and that is going to give you your strongest seam. All right, so go ahead and sew all these together, and then we'll go on to the next section. Okay, here are all my handles and tops of the basket, and don't they look cute? So we're going to set these aside. We're going to do the bottom half of the block, and it looks like this. So we have all of our basket bodies with the star in it, and then we have our basket bottoms right here, and this is essentially going to be exactly the same as what you just did. The bottom piece is going to flip onto the upper piece. You're going to get this all nice and lined up. When you go to sew, you're going to turn this part down, and you're going to sew this way so that your seam allowances are on the top so they can be easily managed, and you can aim for these points on your basket. When you get all of your bottoms sewn onto the body of the basket, then you're going to press the bottom down so the seam allowance will be pointing down, and it will look like this. If you're kind of new and you see this, this is supposed to look like this. It's not going to be a point. If you've got a point, you don't have your seam quite right. That is your seam allowance for when you sew the sashing on, and that is going to come to here, and that's how you're going to have a good point. You should be making 20 basket bottoms like this. Go ahead and press them, and I'll meet you right back here. Now, before we get too far along, I have a little controversial tip for you. Not all quilters are going to agree with this technique, and that's fine. The beauty of quilting is there are no real quilt police, and if someone tells you you did it wrong, then just say, no, I did it my way. When you spin your seam allowances, your intersections here, like we did, you're going to have these seam allowances pressed out and these seam allowances pressed in. When you've got points, like an Ohio star, it is really important that you hit those just right in order to get these beautiful points and they show up on your quilt. So when you have seam allowances that point in like this, it is really difficult to see where that point is and where your seam allowance has to go to make that perfect. So here's the controversial thing. You can take and snip that seam allowance in half like this. Now, of course, you want to be very careful. You want to snip right up to the seam allowance, but not go past. You do not want to snip that thread. Then you're going to just take a second, flip this over, and just give it a little pop. See how, I'll see if I can zoom in when I edit this to see if you can see these little threads right there that pop up. Those are the little loose threads, and that helps you get it down to the stitch line without going past. You do not want to snip into that stitch line. All right, let me show you on this one. So I'm going to flip this one over just like when we were spinning our intersections, right? See that little couple of threads just pop up. Now, if I press this over like this, and I can pop this one, this, pop this one like this. Okay, so now you can see where your point is. So when I sew this seam allowance across here, I can hit that point, and keep going. A lot of people say, well, doesn't that make your seam weak? This is no different than what you've got going on right here. Right? The stitch line is secure, and these are just pressed in opposite directions, just like all of these intersections and joints. So there is no difference as long as you don't snip that stitch line. So when you say, well, so what's the point? Well, the point is twofold. One is this is going to lay much flatter. Instead of having all this bulk, you have this piece and this piece. And look at that. There's 4 pieces right there, flipped back over on top. This is very bulky and it never lies flat. So if you do this, this all lies flat and you cannot see a difference in the top. The second thing that it does is it allows you to see that intersection like I mentioned before. So you can stitch on your line and get right to a perfect point, and on. If you want to give this a try it on a couple of your pieces and then go ahead and put the bottom on. And you'll see it turns out great. So here is where I snipped that seam allowance, and here is where my point is. It made it so easy to get these pieces on with a perfect point, and look, you can't even see a difference. So if you want to give it a try it with 2, put the bottoms on, press it, see if you like it. If you don't like it, if it makes you nervous, then go ahead and do the more traditional way. See which way you like better, and I venture to guess you're going to like this technique better. Everything lies so flat and neat. Okay, we'll keep going, and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, well, look at this. We only have one more step to go. Same thing as before, just going to flip this over onto the bottom, put the top on the bottom, line up this edge, and then when you go to sew it, you're going to flip it over so you can manage your seam allowances, get a nice scant 1/4 inch all the way down. And I would be curious to find out, did you try the controversial seam allowance technique, or did you leave them the traditional way? Put a comment below. Let me know what you thought of it. Did you like it? Did you try it? I would be curious to find out if we've got a bunch of rebels watching or if you are all traditionalists. Okay, so we got 20 blocks here to do. Let's get these done and move on. And look at that. Here we have these really cute baskets all put together. And they're really going to stand out once we get the sashing on and the border all the way around it. All right, there's one last step, and that is squaring up the blocks. Okay, in your pattern in section number 3 and step number 2, it does tell you what the finished size of your block will be. Now, don't be too discouraged if your block doesn't come out exactly the right size, or it's a little small, or it's a little big. These things happen. Squaring up the big block is exactly the same as squaring up our star. You're going to find your center parts. You're going to find places where seam allowances should line up, and you're just going to look and see if you've got any leftover fabric around your edges once you've found the middle. I really like using the 45-degree angle to make sure I get that from corner to corner. So it is advisable to just take the time to put the square on top of each block and see how each block looks, and you're going to get an overall average of your blocks being all the same size. Blocks are never going to come out exactly perfect, and that's why we square them up. I love how each and every one of these baskets turned out. They are so cute. I can't wait to see them all put together. So in the next video, we will go over sashing, layout, and borders. And I'm going to tell you my secret tip for a fast and easy layout that turns out perfect every time. Like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. Thanks for joining us at the Quilter's Candy Shop, where quilting is always delicious. Bye!